It was a quiet evening in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the kind of calm only the countryside could offer. Rolling green fields stretched to the horizon, and the only sounds were the distant clatter of a horse-drawn buggy and the soft hum of insects as the sun dipped below the hills. The Amish community here lived as they had for generations, peacefully, humbly, and deeply rooted in tradition. But on one warm summer night in 1992, that peace was broken in a way no one could have ever imagined. The Yoder family, Jacob, his wife Mary, and their 3 young children, vanished without a trace. They weren't the kind of people to attract attention. Jacob Yoder was known for his craftsmanship, a skilled woodworker whose furniture was sought after even by outsiders. Mary was warm, kind, and often seen with her children walking to the nearby market stand. There was nothing about them that hinted at any trouble. No enemies, no debts, no strange visitors. Yet one morning, their neighbors noticed something strange. The barn door stood wide open. The usual clatter of early morning chores was missing. No smoke curled from the chimney. When the bishop sent someone to check, the house was empty, meals left uneaten, tools scattered, and the Yoders nowhere to be found. At first, many believed they had simply left. But that didn't make sense. The Amish don't just walk away from their lives, especially not without telling their community. Their horse and buggy were still there. Their clothes, money, even the baby's favorite blanket, everything was in place. The only thing missing was the family. Word spread fast through the Amish and English communities alike. Rumors swirled. Had they run away, been taken, or worse? The police opened a case, but it didn't get very far. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no leads. The land surrounding their property was thick with woods and farmlands, making searches difficult. Detectives canvassed the area, knocked on doors, and even brought in dogs. But after weeks of searching, nothing turned up. Eventually, the case grew cold. The file was stored away, and the Yoder family became another small-town mystery, one people spoke of in hushed voices or not at all. But the people who knew the Yoders couldn't forget. Their absence left a hole in the tight-knit community. Every harvest, every Sunday gathering, every buggy ride past their empty home was a reminder of what had been lost. Some said they had seen shadows in the woods, others claimed to hear cries late at night. But these stories were always dismissed as grief or imagination. Life moved on, but the mystery lingered, like an echo no one could silence. Years passed. New families moved into the area. The Yoder property sat untouched, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Vines crept over the barn, and tall grass swallowed the once carefully tended garden. Most people stopped talking about it, not because they didn't care, but because they had no answers. And then, 10 years later, something happened. Something small. Something that, at first, seemed unimportant. But it would turn out to be the key that unraveled everything. In the spring of 2002, a group of teenagers from the neighboring town were hiking through the woods near the old Yoder farm. They weren't supposed to be there. Amish land was considered private, but curiosity got the better of them. One of them had heard about the disappearance and wanted to see the old house for himself. As they approached the clearing, they noticed how strangely intact everything looked. Time had worn the house, yes, but it was still standing, as if waiting for someone to return. They didn't go inside. Something about it felt wrong. But one of the boys noticed something strange near the edge of the property, an old wooden cross, half buried in the ground, carved with markings that didn't match the usual Amish symbols. He took a photo of it with his digital camera and thought nothing more of it. Later, when he showed the image to his uncle, a local historian familiar with Amish customs, the man grew quiet. He leaned in, adjusted his glasses, and said, "That's not from around here." Word spread quickly. The photo made its way back to the Amish elders, who, for the first time in years, agreed to revisit the Yoder home. What they found would raise more questions than answers. Beneath years of dust and decay, a locked trapdoor in the barn floor was discovered, one that had never been mentioned in any police report or community record. It was hidden beneath an old pile of hay bales, barely noticeable. When they opened it, the air turned cold, and a narrow staircase led into darkness. No one dared go down that day. The community elders decided to wait. They wanted to proceed carefully and respectfully. But in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't just a forgotten cellar. Whatever was down there might finally explain what happened to the Yoder family. And yet, the discovery raised a terrifying question. Why had it remained hidden all these years, even after all the police searches? The investigation was reopened. Forensic teams were called in. Local media picked up the story again. People who hadn't spoken about the Yoders in years suddenly had memories, theories, even confessions. An old man stepped forward with a story about a stranger who had come through the area in the early 90s, asking odd questions about the Amish. A woman recalled hearing strange chanting near the Yoder farm on the night they vanished, but never reported it out of fear. Details that had once seemed meaningless began to take on a new light. Still, nothing prepared them for what would be found beneath that barn. What began as a quiet mystery about a missing Amish family was beginning to look like something far more complex and far more chilling. As the pieces started to come together, it became clear that the Yoders hadn't simply disappeared. They had been caught up in something that no one in the community could have imagined, something hidden in plain sight for a decade, waiting to be uncovered. The truth was close now, but so was danger. Because the deeper they dug, the more it became clear that someone, or something, had gone to great lengths to keep this secret buried. And not everyone wanted it to be found. As investigators began their slow descent into the trapdoor beneath the old Yoder barn, the air turned colder with every step. The wooden stairs creaked with age, dust rising from the stone walls like a long-held breath finally exhaled. Flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing a low-ceilinged room built deep into the earth. It wasn't large, maybe 15 feet across, but it was carefully constructed. Stone walls, wooden shelves, a single, broken lantern lying in the corner. The room had clearly been made to stay hidden. But what was more unsettling was the feeling that came over everyone who entered. It wasn't just the cold or the silence. It was the sense that they were intruding on something long forgotten or deliberately left alone. On one of the shelves, a row of glass jars lined the wall. Inside were dried herbs, strange markings carved into wax seals, and small, unfamiliar objects too old to identify, yet arranged with eerie precision. There were also pages, fragments of old books, handwritten notes in fading ink, some in German, others in English. A few Amish elders who came down that evening recognized the language as an older dialect, possibly used in prayers or letters long ago. But what stood out most was a large wooden box, half-rotted with age, resting in the center of the room. Inside the box were pieces of cloth, neatly folded, and what appeared to be personal items: an old bonnet, a child's toy horse carved from wood, a worn Bible with Yoder written faintly on the inside cover. These weren't just random items. They belonged to the family. But why were they down here? Why had they been hidden in a place no one had known existed? The police took everything into evidence, but answers didn't come quickly. The Amish community, usually private and reserved, now found itself at the center of growing curiosity. Reporters began showing up again, setting up near the edge of town, hoping for a photo, a quote, anything. But the community remained tight-lipped. This wasn't something they wanted turned into a spectacle. For them, it wasn't about headlines or theories. It was about a family they'd lost, and a wound reopened after 10 long years. Meanwhile, people began remembering things, small details from that summer in 1992 that hadn't seemed important back then. A young woman named Clara, who had been close friends with Mary Yoder, stepped forward with something she'd never told anyone. She recalled that in the weeks before the disappearance, Mary had grown distant. She didn't smile as much. She stopped attending quilting circles. And there was something else, a letter. Mary had written Clara a short note, folded and handed to her quietly during a church gathering. It simply read, "If anything happens, remember what we talked about. Keep watch near the western tree line." Clara had forgotten about it until now. But when she took investigators to that tree line near the Yoder property, something unusual was found. A cluster of flat stones had been arranged deliberately beneath a large oak, and beneath them, a small leather pouch. Inside were more handwritten notes, a few photographs, and a hand-drawn map. The photographs, faded with time, showed the Yoder children playing near a shed that no longer existed. The map seemed to point to an area deeper in the woods, beyond any of the previous search zones. But what caught everyone's attention was one of the notes. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting matched Mary's. It read, "They come through the woods. We heard them again last night. Jacob says not to worry, but I know they're watching. We must be ready." This note sent chills through everyone who read it. What or who was coming through the woods? And if Mary was afraid, why didn't she tell the elders? Why keep it secret? Theories began forming quickly. Some whispered about outsiders, maybe someone from outside the community who had taken an unhealthy interest in the family. Others believed there was something older involved, tales passed down over generations about strange lights in the woods, or stories told to children about the silent watchers who lived beyond the fields. Of course, many dismissed those as superstition. But now, with real evidence emerging, even the skeptics weren't so sure. The man who owned the land bordering the Yoder property, Samuel Klein, was one of the first to come under scrutiny. He was not Amish, what the community called English, and he had always been a bit of an outsider himself. Reclusive, quiet, and fiercely private. He'd lived alone since the 1980s and rarely spoke to anyone unless absolutely necessary. After the new discoveries, the authorities decided to pay him a visit. Klein didn't resist, but he wasn't welcoming either. He said he knew nothing about the Yoders' disappearance and hadn't spoken to them much beyond a few nods across the fence. But as investigators looked closer at his land, they found strange markers along his tree line, symbols carved into the bark of several trees. They looked like old runes or ritual signs, and no one could figure out who had made them. Klein claimed he hadn't noticed them before, said they were probably done by kids or hikers. But when asked why he'd never reported seeing anyone near his land, he went quiet. Things only got more unsettling when a retired deputy came forward with something from his old notes. He remembered patrolling the area a few nights before the Yoders vanished. Around 2 a.m., he had driven past the Yoder farm and seen a dim light in the woods behind the barn. He didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was a lantern left out. But as he passed, his car radio suddenly cut to static, and he heard what he described as a strange, low hum, something mechanical, but not like anything he'd ever heard before. The next morning, he found tire tracks along a path that should have been in use. He made a report but was told not to worry. Now, 10 years later, he wondered if that moment had been more important than he realized. As all these pieces began coming together, tension in the community grew. Some families became fearful, keeping children indoors and skipping evening gatherings. Others wanted answers, real answers, and demanded the search extend deeper into the woods mapped in Mary's note. But there was a quiet resistance too. Some elders warned against digging too far into the past. They said certain things were best left alone. They feared what might be stirred up. Still, the investigation pressed forward. Drones were flown over the area for the first time, and thermal images picked up irregular heat patterns beneath the ground in the wooded area Mary had marked. It looked like a buried structure. When the ground was surveyed with ground-penetrating radar, it revealed something solid, something man-made, hidden beneath decades of soil and leaves. Preparations were made to excavate the site. But before the equipment could be brought in, a heavy storm rolled in, flooding the area and delaying the dig. And that night, something strange happened again. Several residents reported seeing flickering lights in the woods. One man said he saw a figure walking through the trees, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing, but moving too quickly to be natural. He didn't tell anyone until the next morning, afraid of being mocked. But when he returned to the spot, he found a bundle of twigs arranged in a spiral near his fence. It hadn't been there the day before. Now, more people are beginning to believe that the Yoder mystery isn't just about one family disappearing. It's about something larger, something that had been waiting in the shadows of this quiet community. As the days pass and more questions emerge, the truth seems both closer and more dangerous than ever. And what they find next could change everything. The storm didn't just bring heavy rain, it brought unease. For 3 days, water soaked the fields and flooded the lowlands around the Yoder property. The small creeks that usually ran quiet turned into rushing streams, cutting off back roads and washing out parts of the trail leading to the marked excavation site. For many in the community, it felt like nature itself was trying to slow the search. But despite the setbacks, investigators remained determined. They had come too far to turn back now. The morning the digging resumed, the air was still damp and heavy. A small crowd gathered at a safe distance as the crew began clearing away layers of wet soil, carefully following the radar markers. Among the group watching was Clara, Mary's old friend, who hadn't slept much since the first note was discovered. She stood silently near the fence line, clutching the small cloth pouch Mary had hidden years ago. Beside her was Levi Fisher, a quiet man in his 50s who had helped Jacob Yoder build his barn 2 decades ago. He hadn't spoken about it until now, but something about the recent events had stirred memories he couldn't ignore any longer. He turned to Clara and spoke softly. "I remember Jacob once told me he was thinking about digging a cellar, but not under the house. Said he wanted it out of sight, just in case." Clara looked at him, surprised. "In case of what?" Levi hesitated. "He never said. Just that it was safer that way." He paused, looking out at the dig site. "I thought he meant storms. But now I wonder." Just then, one of the workers called out. They'd found something. The machinery stopped. Shovels took over. Slowly, the shape of what looked like a doorway emerged from the earth. It was made of old stone and wood, its entrance sealed tightly with rotted planks and iron hinges. No one recognized the structure. It wasn't on any map, not listed in any record. It wasn't even positioned the way Amish cellars were traditionally built. This felt different, purposeful, hidden. As authorities prepared to open it, the air shifted. The crowd grew silent. It was more than curiosity now, it was fear. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, creeping kind that settles into your bones when something doesn't feel right. And yet, everyone stayed. Before they opened the entrance, one of the officers asked Levi if he'd ever seen anything like it before. He shook his head, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door. "It's not Amish. We don't build like that. And we sure don't bury anything we plan to use." When they finally broke through the planks, the space inside was pitch black. A narrow tunnel stretched out beneath the earth, leading into darkness. The air smelled of mold and damp stone, but beneath it, there was something else, an odd scent no one could place. The officers entered slowly, flashlights scanning the tunnel's walls. After about 20 feet, they reached a larger chamber. What they found inside stopped them cold. It wasn't just a room, it was a kind of sanctuary. Symbols were etched into the walls, circles, crosses, unfamiliar patterns. A small altar sat in the center, and above it, hanging from the ceiling, was a rusted lantern still strung by wire. On the altar was a single object, a piece of wood carved into the shape of a figure, arms outstretched, eyes closed. It was simple, but there was something disturbing about it. It didn't feel like art. It felt like a warning. Photos were taken. Samples were collected. And once again, the Yoder mystery deepened. There was no sign of human remains, no sign of recent activity, but also no explanation for what the chamber was used for, or who built it. The Amish elders met that evening and discussed it in private. Some believed it was the work of outsiders, maybe settlers from long ago who had left behind strange customs. Others feared something else, something spiritual. A few even wondered if the Yoders had stumbled onto this place themselves, and whatever it was meant to stay buried. That night, Levi returned home and began looking through an old chest he hadn't touched in years. Inside were papers, letters, and tools left behind by his father, who had also been a carpenter. One envelope caught his attention. It had no name, just the words, "Don't forget," written in faded pencil. Inside was a letter, written in shaky handwriting, describing a night in 1968 when Levi's father and another man had found something buried in the woods, something not meant to be seen. They had covered it back up, never told anyone, and agreed to keep watch. The other man? Jacob Yoder's father. Levi's hand shook as he read the final line of the letter. "If they start coming back, it means we failed." He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, watching the woods, thinking of Jacob, of Mary, of the children, wondering what his father had seen, wondering if the warning had come too late. Meanwhile, across the county, another thread of the story began to emerge. A woman named Ellen, now in her 70s, had once worked as a nurse in the nearby town. After hearing news of the recent discoveries, she came forward with something she had kept quiet for years. In the summer of 1992, just weeks before the Yoders vanished, a man had come into the clinic with deep cuts on his arms and back. He didn't give a name and refused treatment, saying he just needed supplies. She remembered his eyes, dark, restless, like he hadn't slept in days. He said something she'd never forgotten. "It's in the ground now, but it still calls." At the time, she thought he was just delusional. But now, hearing about the symbols, the tunnel, the carved figure, she wasn't so sure. The deeper people looked, the more it became clear that the Yoder family's disappearance wasn't a random event. It was part of something older, something threaded through the land, through memory and silence. The question wasn't just what happened to the Yoders, but what they had discovered. What had they seen that made Mary leave those notes, that made Jacob build a hidden cellar, that made a whole family vanish without warning? And yet, there was still no sign of the family themselves. No bodies. No proof they had died. Just clues. Scattered, haunting, and growing more disturbing with every new discovery. Some began to whisper that maybe the family was still alive. Hidden. Or hiding. Perhaps they had gone underground, literally or figuratively, to protect themselves from something no one else could understand. But if that were true, why hadn't they come back? Or worse, what if they couldn't? More questions came when another discovery was made, this time near the edge of the property, where a dried-up creek bed had recently been exposed after the storm. Buried beneath the muddy banks was a small wooden panel, broken and splintered, with the same symbols found in the tunnel scratched into its surface. But behind the panel was something else, another note, preserved inside a tin box. This one was different. It wasn't Mary's handwriting. It was Jacob's. They said we must keep it sealed. But the ground is moving again. We hear it at night. If we disappear, it's because we chose to. We won't risk the children. Tell Clara. Tell Levi. Keep the fence whole. Those words haunted Clara when the officers brought her the letter. Keep the fence whole. What did it mean? She thought about the old boundary line between the Yoder property and the woods. The place where the teenagers had found the strange cross 10 years ago. The place where, long ago, Jacob had once asked Levi to help him build a stronger fence, taller, heavier, not like a normal pasture fence. Back then, Levi had thought it was to keep animals out. Now he wasn't so sure. The mystery was no longer just about the Yoders. It was about the land, the silence, and the secrets buried beneath the soil. And while some in the community wanted to stop, to forget again, others knew that whatever had started 10 years ago wasn't finished yet. Because late that same night, a local farmer checking his cattle near the woods found something that shouldn't have been there, a fresh set of footprints, barefoot, leading out of the forest toward the old Yoder house. The prints were small, like a child's. The farmer stood frozen in the mud, flashlight trembling in his grip as he stared at the small footprints ahead. They trailed off from the tree line, weaving through the wet grass, right toward the old Yoder house. The soil was soft, but the prints were fresh, clear, defined, and unmistakably human. But what unnerved him most wasn't just the size. It was the fact that they stopped right at the porch. No sign of retreat. No other tracks. Just stopped. He backed away slowly, trying to quiet his breathing. The woods behind him felt too silent, too still, like the night was holding its breath. He didn't stick around. By morning, word had spread. The prints were photographed, measured, and examined. They were smaller than any adults, roughly the size of a child who might have been 5 or 6. But the Yoder children would be much older now, if they were still alive. This discovery brought the entire investigation to a new level. Officers returned to the property with tracking dogs, hoping to follow the scent, but the trail vanished at the porch. It was like the child had appeared out of nowhere and simply vanished again. Search parties combed the woods for days, but nothing turned up. No clothes, no signs of life, no other tracks. Just that single line of barefoot prints. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching. She began sleeping with her oil lamp lit, waking at every creak in the floorboards. Levi, meanwhile, spent his nights pacing his front porch with a lantern, staring out at the fence line Jacob had once been so insistent about reinforcing. The meaning behind Jacob's last note echoed in his mind. Keep the fence whole. He checked it every day now, post by post, wire by wire. One afternoon, he found something disturbing. Near the back corner of the fence, one of the wooden posts had been clawed, deep gouges cut into the side, as if something had scraped at it with jagged fingers or nails. It wasn't the work of an animal, not like anything he'd ever seen. He didn't tell anyone right away. Instead, he sat on his porch that night, shotgun resting across his lap, waiting, listening. But the sound that came wasn't what he expected. It wasn't footsteps or rustling leaves. It was humming, low, melodic, faint, but chilling in the quiet dark, like a lullaby sung from behind the trees. He rose slowly and stepped off the porch, holding his breath, lantern lifted. The sound faded as he moved closer to the woods. When he reached the fence line, he stopped. The humming was gone, but someone had placed something there. Resting on the top rail of the fence was a child's toy. Wooden, hand-carved. A horse. Exactly like the one that had been found in the hidden cellar beneath the Yoder barn. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. On the underside, carved in tiny letters, were the initials, A.Y. Yoder. The youngest child. Levi brought it to Clara the next morning. She stared at it for a long time, her face pale. Mary used to carve little animals like this for the children, she said. She said it helped calm them at night. Anna always slept with the horse under her pillow. Now the tension was becoming unbearable. Rumors surged through the community. Some said the Yoders had never left. Others believed something had taken them and was now trying to lead people to the truth or deeper into the woods. The symbols, the tunnels, the strange figure found in the underground chamber, none of it had been explained. And still, the authorities could find no solid answers. Every lead just opened more doors. Then one evening, just before sunset, another clue appeared, this time left on the church steps. It was a notebook, wrapped in cloth, damp from the dew but mostly intact. The cover was old, stained with time. Inside were pages filled with careful handwriting. It was Mary Yoder's journal. The entries were dated from early 1992, leading up to the night of the disappearance. The first few pages were normal, descriptions of the children, her baking, helping neighbors. But then things shifted. She began mentioning things she'd seen, lights in the woods, symbols etched into trees, strange dreams that wouldn't go away. One entry stood out more than the rest. Jacob says it's just imagination, but I saw them last night. 3 figures in the trees. Watching. They don't move like people. They stand too still, and their eyes don't blink. I prayed, but I don't think they're spirits. I think they're waiting for something. I think they've been here longer than we know. Another entry followed days later. We found the door in the woods. It was buried, but not locked. Jacob says we shouldn't have opened it. He was right. Ever since, we hear things. Sometimes I find Anna standing by the window at night, staring out, whispering. I asked her what she sees. She says, the ones who live below. The last entry, written in a rushed, uneven hand, simply read, if anyone finds this, keep the door sealed. Keep the fence whole. Don't follow the music. The journal sent shockwaves through the community. But more than that, it terrified people. If what Mary had written was true, then the family hadn't vanished randomly. They had discovered something buried, something ancient, possibly dangerous. And now, whatever it was, it seemed to be resurfacing. The sheriff, already under pressure to explain the unexplainable, authorized a full excavation of the area around the second underground chamber. More equipment was brought in. For days, workers dug deeper, tracing a narrow tunnel that extended from the original structure. It led to a collapsed area, a cave-in that had blocked off a much larger space. They began clearing it cautiously. Every stone removed seemed to bring a new uneasiness. And then, late one night, they broke through. The larger chamber beyond was untouched. A dome space hidden beneath the earth, walls carved with more symbols, this time in layers, some fresh, others ancient. But in the center of the room was something no one expected. A circle of stones. Inside it, undisturbed, lay a small cot. And on it, the remains of what looked like a child's blanket. But there were no bodies. No bones. Just the blanket. And on the wall above, a single word, scratched deep into the stone, waiting. That word spread fast. Whispers of it moved through the fields, the kitchens, the markets. Some said it meant the Yoders were still alive. Others believed it was a warning. Maybe both. Clara, now deeply involved in helping authorities translate the old notes and symbols, found herself drawn to the idea that Mary and Jacob had tried to stop something. That the hidden chamber, the carvings, even the reinforced fence, were all part of an effort to keep a boundary intact, one not just physical, but spiritual. A barrier between the world above and something waiting below. That night, she had a dream. In it, Mary stood in the woods, holding Anna's hand. Her eyes were hollow, but she wasn't afraid. She simply looked at Clara and said, "It's not about us anymore. It's about what follows." Then she turned and vanished into the trees. When Clara woke up, she couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been just a dream. Back near the excavation site, Levi discovered the claw marks had returned, only this time they were on the inside of the fence. Something had crossed, and no one had seen it happen. As night fell again, the wind picked up. The wood swayed and groaned, the sky low and heavy. Dogs barked into the dark. Lanterns flickered, and far in the distance, drifting softly through the trees, came a sound that hadn't been heard in years. Humming, just like before. Only now, it was closer. The humming grew louder with every passing second, curling through the trees like smoke. It wasn't a melody you could name, just a slow, low sound that felt ancient, almost alive. Clara heard it from her porch and stood frozen, heart pounding in her chest. Lights flickered inside the house as if something unseen passed through the air, dragging energy with it. She stepped down slowly, lantern in hand, eyes locked on the darkness just beyond the fence line. Levi heard it too, all the way across the field. He gripped his lantern tighter, knuckles white, and stepped off his porch. The humming wasn't just sound, it carried weight. It pressed against his chest, tugging at his thoughts, making the world feel just slightly off. And deep down, he knew this was connected to the fence. It always had been. The townspeople, now more anxious than ever, began gathering near the church the next morning. The pastor, a soft-spoken man named Elias who had lived in the county for 30 years, brought everyone together to pray. But even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. He spoke of faith, of boundaries, and of trials, but it was clear the community no longer knew what they were dealing with. Some believed it was spiritual. Others thought it was something older, something that had always been there, beneath the land, buried under layers of silence and forgotten warnings. Then, without warning, the second twist came. During another sweep of the woods near the original cellar, searchers discovered something unexpected, buried beneath an old tree stump that had fallen during the storm. A rusted metal box. It was heavy and sealed shut, but when they finally pried it open, they found a bundle of old papers, brittle with age, and a black and white photograph. The photograph showed two men standing near a well. One was clearly Jacob Yoder, younger, smiling faintly. The other man was an Amish. He wore a suit, long coat, and wide-brimmed hat, an outsider. No one recognized him at first, but when the papers were examined, it became clear who he was. His name was Dr. Silas Roque, a historian from the nearby university who had disappeared in 1973 while researching Pennsylvania's early settlements. He had written dozens of letters and field reports about strange religious movements and unmarked burial grounds in Lancaster County. And then, one day, he was simply gone. Until now. The papers inside the box were fragments from Roque's journals, detailing his last known research. He believed that before the Amish settled the land, an older group had lived there, a splinter sect with rituals meant to anchor something they believed lived beneath the soil. Roque had written, "They called them the Watchers, but I don't think they were watching. I think they were waiting." He claimed to have found signs of underground chambers, similar to the one found under the Yoder barn, and referenced stone carvings believed to be warnings or seals. His final journal entry ended mid-sentence, with just a single phrase underlined twice. "If the seal is broken, they will return." Now, everything was shifting. The Yoder family hadn't just stumbled into something by accident. They had uncovered something Dr. Roque had warned about nearly 2 decades before they vanished. And Jacob's father, who had once worked with Levi's father, must have known about it too. A secret passed down through silence. A secret buried until the day Jacob decided to dig that cellar. But the real shock came when someone noticed the handwriting on one of the journal pages. It didn't match Roque's earlier notes. The ink was fresher, and the writing uneven. At the bottom of the page was a note that read, "It wasn't supposed to open. We made a mistake. Forgive us. July." Jacob Yoder had found the journal, maybe years after Roque vanished. And instead of burning it or hiding it, he had added to it a warning, a confession, proof that he had tried to contain whatever it was. But that meant something else. Jacob had survived after the disappearance. At least for a while. That changed everything. Now the authorities had to consider the possibility that the Yoders hadn't vanished on the night they were reported missing. They may have fled, hidden themselves, or worse, been trapped. If Jacob had time to read Roque's journal and add his own note, then they had stayed near the property longer than anyone believed. It raised the question no one wanted to say out loud. Was the Yoder family still alive somewhere beneath that land? As teams began planning a deeper excavation, a new problem emerged. Several of the workers refused to return. Two men quit on the spot, saying they had seen a figure in the woods the night before. A tall man in dark clothes, standing between the trees, not moving. One claimed the figure had no face. The other refused to speak altogether, just packed his tools and drove off. Tension spread fast. The sheriff tried to keep things under control, but even his deputies were beginning to whisper. Some wanted to shut the whole thing down. Others pushed to go deeper. Clara remained calm on the outside, but her dreams were growing stranger. Now, every night, she saw Mary not standing in the woods anymore, but walking through the tunnel, leading someone by the hand. A child. Sometimes Anna. Sometimes another girl she didn't recognize. Always silent. Always leading her somewhere just out of reach. One night, Clara woke to find something at her doorstep. A small package wrapped in cloth. Inside was a page torn from a hymnal, but the words were wrong. Instead of verses, it was a message. She remembers. But the others don't. Bring her to the place before the final night. Before the ground sings. There was no signature. No sign of who left it. But she knew what it meant. Someone or something wanted her to return to the cellar. Not the new one. The old one. The one under the barn. She went to Levi that same day, showing him the note. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "There's something I never told you." Years ago, when Jacob had just finished building that barn, Levi helped him reinforce the foundation. And during that time, Jacob had shown him something, just briefly. A crack in the earth beneath the floorboards. Not wide, just a hairline split. But Jacob had been terrified of it. Said it was where the humming came from. Said he'd been dreaming about it since he was a boy. That his father used to say it had to stay closed. That it listens. Levi had laughed it off back then. But now he wasn't laughing. That evening, as they prepared to return to the barn one final time, storm clouds began gathering once again. The sky darkened faster than usual. The wind picked up, and just before sundown, the dogs began howling. The community gathered at the church again, this time not for prayer, but for answers. Many were ready to leave, to pack up and move away from the land that had kept its secrets for too long. But some, like Clara and Levi, knew they couldn't walk away now. Whatever had started was reaching its peak. Something had been unlocked, and they had only one chance to stop it, or at least understand it before it went too far. As they neared the barn, lanterns glowing, wind snapping at their coats, the humming returned. This time louder, closer. And as they pulled open the cellar door and stepped inside, they didn't know yet that what waited in the dark had been expecting them. And it had begun to remember them too. Clara descended into the cellar with Levi close behind, their lanterns casting long, jittery shadows against the stone walls. The air grew colder the deeper they went, but it wasn't just temperature, it was the kind of cold that settled inside your bones, making your heart beat slower, your breath shorter. The humming was louder now. Not a song, not even a melody, just a vibration in the walls, like the earth itself was holding a breath it couldn't release. When they reached the bottom, the original chamber looked the same as before, dusty, cracked walls, that carved wooden figure still resting on the altar, staring blankly with its closed eyes. But something had changed. At the back of the room, where only stone wall had been before, a crack had formed. Thin, jagged, unnatural. It hadn't been there days ago. Clara stepped toward it slowly, raising her lantern, and her breath caught in her throat. Beyond the crack, she could see movement. Flickering shadows. A deeper space behind the wall. As if the chamber had never been the end, but a doorway. Levi called out softly, "Clara, do you hear that?" She nodded. Voices. Not loud, but layered. Like a whisper inside a whisper, echoing from beyond the stone. She leaned in closer, heart racing. The air coming through the crack smelled damp, but not foul. Just old. She placed her hand against the wall. It was warm. Suddenly, the wall groaned. The crack widened with a soft crumble, stone flaking away. And then, without warning, part of the wall collapsed inward, revealing a narrow tunnel carved by hands, or something like hands, long ago. Dust clouded the air. Clara coughed, eyes watering, but she pressed forward. They walked in silence, the humming now coming from all directions. The tunnel twisted, dipping slightly downward, until it opened into a circular room. This one was different from the others. Larger. Older. In the center stood a ring of stones, arranged in a perfect circle, with ash scattered across the ground. Symbols lined the walls, some they had seen before, others unfamiliar. But what froze them in place was what stood in the middle. 3 figures. Clara gripped Levi's arm, eyes wide. The figures weren't moving. Not human. Statues, maybe. They were pale, tall, and thin, like stone wrapped in cloth, but their faces were smooth, without eyes or mouths. Just blank. And yet, they seemed to be breathing. Clara stepped forward, drawn in by something she couldn't explain. Her lantern flickered as she moved past the stone ring. And then she saw her, a girl, sitting at the far edge of the chamber, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide, face pale. She looked no older than 5. Clara gasped. "Anna?" she whispered. The girl looked up. Her eyes were blue, familiar, terrified. She didn't speak, but she reached out slowly. Clara dropped to her knees. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm here now." Levi stepped forward too, mouth trembling. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Jacob's girl." Clara wrapped the child in her shawl, lifting her gently. She was cold, but breathing. Real. Alive. Behind them, one of the stone figures trembled. A low sound rumbled through the chamber, like rock grinding against rock. Then, for the first time, one of the figures moved. It turned slowly, head tilting, as if sensing them. The humming grew louder. Levi grabbed Clara's shoulder. "We need to go?" "Now." But before they could move, a voice echoed through the chamber. It wasn't from the statues. It was from the darkness beyond them. "You were warned." Clara froze. Another figure stepped into the light, not made of stone, but flesh. A man. Thin. Pale. Dressed in torn Amish clothing, beard long and tangled, eyes wide but glassy. His voice cracked as he spoke. They sealed it once before. But the ground breaks. It always breaks. Clara's mouth fell open. "Jacob." He blinked slowly. "You shouldn't have come." Tears welled in her eyes. "What happened to you?" He looked at the statues behind him. "We opened the wrong door. We thought it was history. We thought we could bury it. But it buries you." Levi took a step back. "What are they?" Jacob's eyes flicked to him. "Not what. When. Time doesn't flow here like it does above. We hid, but they watched. We begged, but they waited. Mary, she kept them away for a while." Clara looked around frantically. "Where is she? And the others?" Jacob didn't answer. He just looked past them, into the tunnel they'd come through. "They followed you." And then the humming turned into a pulse. The stones on the floor began to glow faintly, symbols lighting up in slow patterns. The figures stepped forward, stone feet scraping softly, as if testing the ground. Jacob stepped between them and Clara. "Take her and go. You have to go. Don't look back." Clara hesitated. "But you—" "Go," he shouted, louder than before. His voice echoed through the chamber. Levi grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the tunnel. Clara clutched the child tight against her chest, heart slamming in her ears. The humming was now deafening. As they reached the tunnel's mouth, she turned for one last look. Jacob stood still, arms outstretched toward the figures, who now glowed with faint red light from within. The room shook. The walls cracked. And then darkness swallowed them. The tunnel behind them caved in, sealing the path. Clara stumbled, nearly falling, but Levi pulled her forward. They ran blindly through the collapsing earth until they reached the cellar stairs. They burst through the trapdoor, gasping for air, covered in dust and ash. Outside, the wind had stopped. The woods were quiet again. They didn't speak as they carried Anna back to town. The child never said a word. She simply held tight to Clara's shawl, eyes wide, silent. The community was stunned. Authorities tried to ask questions, but Clara gave them only what they needed. She had found the child in an old root cellar, confused but unharmed. There was no talk of tunnels, or statues, or Jacob. But deep down, she knew. Whatever had been buried beneath the Yoder property wasn't just physical. It was something older than memory, something that had been watched and warned and forgotten, until someone dug too deep. They held a quiet vigil that week. No answers were given. No bodies recovered. Just silence, respect, and fear. And then, just when the dust began to settle, the final twist revealed itself. One morning, Clara woke early and went to her porch. The air was still. Anna sat quietly in a chair beside her, now calm, eating a piece of bread. Clara smiled and touched the child's hair. That's when she noticed something. A small, circular mark behind Anna's ear. Faint, like a scar. Or a brand. A symbol. One Clara had seen carved into the stone altar. She froze, heart pounding. Anna looked up at her slowly, eyes wide, innocent. But behind those eyes, for just a second, Clara saw something else. A flicker. Not fear. Not confusion. But awareness. And then, softly, the girl began to hum. Clara didn't react right away. She sat there quietly, her hand resting on the arm of the rocking chair, her eyes fixed on Anna's face. The little girl kept humming gently, as if unaware of the tension in the air. But Clara wasn't listening to the tune, she was listening to what was underneath it. That strange feeling in her chest, like something familiar but wrong, something out of place wearing the face of a child she once knew. She didn't speak about the mark behind Anna's ear. Not to Levi, not to the sheriff, not even to the nurse who came by once a day to check on the girl's health. Anna didn't speak either. She ate, she slept, she walked the garden paths in silence, humming softly whenever she was alone. She responded to her name, nodded when asked simple questions, but the words never came. It was as if she had learned to be present without being known. The community tried to return to normal, but normal felt different now. People kept their curtains closed longer. They walked with heavier steps. And some families quietly packed up and moved away, needing distance from the land they once called home. A few weeks after the cellar collapsed and the final chamber sealed, a team of researchers came from the university to examine the Yoder property. They were polite but skeptical, curious about the sudden flurry of interest. The sheriff gave them limited access to the barn area, but by then, the tunnel entrance had filled completely. The ground showed signs of shifting again, like it had breathed once more before going still. They found fragments of carved stone, old wood, and ash, but no clear evidence of the deeper chambers. No trace of Jacob. To them, it was just a curious story that had spiraled into local folklore. Levi, however, knew better. He never spoke publicly about what he saw in the chamber, or about the man who had stood in its center. But late one evening, while helping Clara fix a fence panel, he said quietly, "It wasn't just that we disturbed something. It was waiting for us to do it." Clara nodded, understanding him without needing more words. That was the part that stayed with her the most, not the fear, not the humming, not even the hidden tunnels. It was the idea that someone, or something, had waited in silence until the right doors were opened by the right hands. Not by mistake. By design. Mary's journal was eventually donated to the small local museum. The entries, carefully copied and preserved, became part of a display about rural mysteries and lost families. But the final page was kept private, only read by Clara, Levi, and the sheriff. It was Mary's last words, scrawled in trembling ink. "If we disappear, it's not death. It's sacrifice. Keep the ground whole. And watch the child. She remembers more than she should." Clara thought about that line often. She watched Anna closely in the following months. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Concern. Maybe even sadness. Because as the weeks passed, the girl began to show signs that she wasn't just surviving, she was changing. She stopped humming. Her eyes grew sharper. She began walking with purpose again, exploring the edges of the Yoder property, stopping often at the base of the trees near the old fence line. One day, Clara followed her quietly, just to see. Anna walked all the way to the old stump where the metal box had been found. She knelt, touched the earth, and sat still. Not playing, not hiding, just sitting, like she was listening. Clara stayed hidden behind a tree, not wanting to disturb her. After a few minutes, Anna whispered something. Clara couldn't make out the words, but she knew what it meant. The child hadn't forgotten anything, and maybe she never would. As the seasons changed, so did the town's memory. The story of the vanished Amish family became part of whispered conversation again. Parents told their children to stay away from the old barn. Teenagers dared each other to walk the fence at night. Most had no idea what had truly happened. Just bits and pieces. The woods hummed sometimes in the wind. Lights flickered near the tree line. But no one went digging anymore. Levi sold his land the following year and moved closer to town. He still visited Clara sometimes, and occasionally brought old letters or news from nearby communities. But he never went near the fence again. Not once. Clara stayed in the Yoder house with Anna, tending the garden and keeping things quiet. She never tried to find Mary. She knew better than to look where doors weren't meant to be opened again. On the first anniversary of the day they found Anna, Clara lit a lantern and placed it on the front porch, just as Mary had done every evening. She sat beside it until morning, listening. The woods were quiet. The earth stayed still. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel peace. Not because everything had been solved. Not because the danger was gone. But because sometimes, surviving is its own kind of ending. Later that fall, Anna began to speak. Slowly at first. One word here, another there. But what she said was never about the past. She talked about the chickens, the flowers, the clouds. Simple, innocent things. And Clara let her. Because she knew, deep down, that if Anna ever chose to talk about what really happened under the ground, it wouldn't be for comfort. It would be a warning. The old barn eventually collapsed during a storm. The roof gave way, the foundation cracked again, and the rest sank into the soil. Nature swallowed what was left, as if trying to hide the wound. No one rebuilt it. No one cleared the space. The land grew over slowly, the grass thick and wild. And the community, still cautious, never asked questions about it again. But sometimes, when the sky turned gray and the wind picked up just right, people said they could still hear something in the air. Not quite music. Not quite a voice. Just a sound, faint and low, carried by the breeze across the fields and into the woods. And for those who had lived through that strange summer, those who remembered the symbols, the cellar, the footprints, they never needed to ask what it meant. Some things beneath the ground never die. They simply wait. And sometimes, they come back wearing a child's smile.